municipal contributions. Under the draft assumptions, I have the draft valuation. I have assumed there are no assumption changes at this time to give you the basis for the starting point of what would happen if you made no changes at this time. So some of the key points to highlight here are the plan uses a smooth return for comparing assets to liabilities. And that smoothing helps to maintain less volatility from year to year that the market can introduce. But it is a 2-year average of the return, assuming a 7% return. The valuation is based on an 8% long-term return, which is on the higher end of the reasonable range of investment returns going forward. And discussions with your investment advisor about the asset allocations that the plan uses could better align. The goal is for those long-term investment allocations to match what we use for the valuation assumption in order to have the most consistent MMO from year to year to fund the plan liabilities as we expect them. The more closely that we can align the plan assumptions with what actually happens in reality, the better funded your plan is going to be and have a more consistent contribution requirement from year to year. Under the current results, the funded percentage of this on the smoothed basis at January 1, 2025 has decreased from the 2023 valuation from 85.8% to 82.9%. This is a combination of that smoothed asset value, recognizing some of those losses from prior years, and also some experience losses that where the plan demographics did not meet the expectations. So pays were a little bit higher than we expected, and retired members were living a little bit longer than we had anticipated. So more payments going out of the plan increases your expense. With these results, under the current no change assumption, I would expect this would increase your 2027 MMO by about $130,000. So right off the bat, no changes to the valuation assumptions. You're looking at an increase to the MMO for 2027. If you were to look at an increase or a change to the interest rate assumption, as you lower interest rate assumptions, that results in higher liabilities because you're presuming less investment earnings in the future, and those need to be made up by contributions. If you're looking at a 25 basis point reduction to just 7.75, that would be an additional $72,000 increase to the MMO. So if you did the reduction of 25% basis or 25 basis points, your total 2027 MMO is going to be about $102,000 more than it currently is. The 7.75% might be a little on the high side as well, based on conversations with your investment advisor, but many other municipalities across the state are taking incremental steps every valuation cycle to ultimately get to where they want to go. Taking a whole percentage point jump from 8% to 7% would be very cost prohibitive.
Right. Any board questions or comments? Any staff comments?
I would just say I do think it's something. I do think that it's time for us to start lowering that assumed rate of return. As Ashley said, I think if we could do 0.25%, 25 basis points, that will start moving us closer to actual capital market assumptions. Right now, the pension plans in the 70-30 ETF model And I was looking, that's got a roughly like a 6.94% return. So there's definitely a delta between what the model is expected to return and what we're assuming from an actuarial perspective um, of what we'll receive in terms of that. Um,
So
Maybe consumption is higher than what it actually is also. And getting to do with that can mean, lower that a little bit. If they're lowering. And three, we can look at like one basis point in the salary scale. The one thing to consider is that oftentimes the salary scale is a long-term scale, and it does include pay jumps in job titles and things like that. So generally, over the long term, police pay scale fall short of what they actually are. And we've seen that just in a short term with the 2-year evaluation, they fell short of what we had. But it is something we could look at. Like if we choose.
So we do this evaluation over 2 years, right? And so if we did trying to get down to 7% and we did it incrementally every 2, I mean, that's still, to me, is a long time to be out of bounds when we're acknowledging that we're out of balance right now. I think we have to think about, I mean, obviously maybe not all one big jump, but maybe 0.25% isn't enough. I mean, we should think about this a little bit about how quickly we want to get down to normal and have a plan, because I think, like I said, I think doing it piece by piece by piece just kind of kicking the can down the road. You don't have a response yet.
Yeah,
Just something.
No, I mean, I understand that, and yeah, right. Like it would take 8 years to effectively get us to where capital market assumptions are, and who knows in 8 years where the market's going to be. I mean, we could end up where we're starting to do quarter percent decreases, and the market returns, and we're good. The other piece is like if we start and we could even look at doing 0.25% a year, right?
Mhm.
But I think the other piece is, as you start doing it, you also get some investment gains, hopefully, as a result of that increased money that you're putting into the plan. I mean, at the end of the day, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Ashley, but my understanding is like anything with an actuarial a funded ratio of greater than 80% is considered to be a fairly healthy plan.
Mhm.
It defied a little bit of logic in my mind when I first got into pensions. Yeah, would it be great to be at 100 or 102% where there's no MMO? Like township doesn't have to put anything towards that. Yes. But at the end of the day, whatever we decide, I do think we need to start lowering that actuarial.
Right, and I think we can't predict the fluctuations of the market. I mean, we can just take what the model says, and I just think that it's clear that we have to start moving, and I would be on the side of trying to do it as quickly as feasible, understanding that we have to find the money somewhere. So, just that'll just leave that there.
And that's also something to consider. As we get to 2027, we know the investment returns from last year were pretty good, better than the 8%, hopefully for your plan as well as many others. There may also be experience gains that we can see when we do the 2027. And if there are, that provides greater opportunity to make a bigger change in the interest rate assumption without such a huge financial impact to your budget.
Right.
Ideally, we would plan these changes in years where there are other investment gains or experience gains so that the financial impact is minimized. But at some point, if you keep waiting for that day may never come and it only gets worse, which is why we're suggesting something this cycle.
All right. Certainly a conversation to be continued. I appreciate the presentation. Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
I did just want to share that for timing, these valuations need to be finalized and filed with the state by the end of March. So there's a bit of a time constraint on making a decision here.
All right.
Thank you, Ashley. And that, I think that leads us into another timely topic of kind of the report on the long-range financial study, and there's even a slide about pension contributions and the impact that has on the budget. Just kind of putting it in perspective with the, we finalized this valuation. If we were to do that 0.25%, that's starting us in the development of the 2027 budget at that much of a deficit. And then, so all different things to keep in mind. And it's okay. I'm going to turn it over to Gordon Mann with PFM to run through his presentation.
Thanks, Bobby. Yeah, this is perfectly timed. You really have this well thought out. Because now you're going to get to hear about a different type of contribution and perhaps how to think about the pension in light of other things, which was not entirely my intention, but we can wrap two things together. So last year in the spring, you hired PFM to work with you on a capital plan, on a capital budget and a capital plan. Capital means things that you buy that have a useful life that are relatively expensive, and they're predominantly things. So they're roads, this building that we're sitting in, some vehicles, things that aren't usually as easy to think of as capital: bridges, parks, hardware, and for your computers, and sometimes some consulting services that go along with all of these things. So these are things that your residents and your employees see and touch and need every single day. If you have a really well-funded police department with a great pension plan and no cars, you're going to get very minimal value out of that, right? If this building, which I think is very nice, but I understand there are thoughts about maybe changing it, is insufficient, then the tax rate matters a little less to your residents. So you brought us in for that, and yeah, go ahead. We want to start by saying something that you probably already know, but maybe being in the weeds of things here in Euclid, it helps from someone outside to say this. You are in a really strong place generally financially, right? You have a beautiful community, you have all kinds of assets, and it's not just me saying that. I can look at the numbers and they tell me that's the case. Your home values are higher, your earnings are growing, even relative to Chester County. So even if we're comparing you to other communities around you, you are in a very strong place. That doesn't mean that you don't have challenges, but I want to start with that, not because it will make the bad news easier, but because it's important to have that kind of context. We're starting from a place of strength, but there are some challenges that we have to think through. So PFM was hired to put together a different kind of model that takes your operational funding, your revenues and your expenses, and projects them out over 5 years. And the reason we're doing that is largely to say, okay, how do we afford to invest in capital? How do we afford to pave more roads if that's something we want to do? How do we afford to spend more on parks? How do we afford more to do something different with this building or the police building? That's the essence of our model. What we're presenting today is to start with the baseline projection to say, okay, what's our starting point? What I'm going to show you is an artificial situation. It's a situation that assumes we all walk out of here, we never come back. That you don't do anything, that there are no changes to your revenues and expenses, you never change the budget, it just runs on autopilot, right? That's not going to happen. but we start with that so we understand how big, what are the challenges, how big, and how do they change. So this is the baseline projection within your general fund. I covered that, so we can skip that part already. The one part I'll warn you is we're not wizards, we're not fortune tellers, and so what we do, much like what Conrad Siegel does or what CBiz does, is we make assumptions, we make informed guesses, we test reality, and then we see if it's real. I'm a fairly energetic presenter, so I'm going to, hopefully I don't blow your audio here. This is, if you're only going to focus on one slide for your operating budget, this is the one to focus on. So most communities in Pennsylvania have what I would call a structural deficit. They don't have a deficit in their budget. They're required by law to pass a budget that has revenues and expenses balanced every year, and you have done even a little better than that. You have a small surplus in your budget. But they have a structural deficit, which means their recurring revenues grow more slowly than their recurring expenses. If they walk out of the room and they never come back, eventually, although in your case it might be 300 years from now, eventually they run out of money, right? Because revenues and expenses don't grow at the same pace. Your revenues, the growth over the period of time that we looked at, grew by a little under 3%. And you can see most of that is driven by your earned income tax. We'll come back to that one. Your expenditures, I'm sorry, this is in the projection. This is not historical. This is in the projection. We project your revenues would grow at a little under 3, and we project that your expenditures grow at a little under 4. Why? Well, one of the things is actually the pension contribution, because it goes up by $130,000. So we didn't coordinate, but it's almost like we did. If I looked at you historically, you were, at least up until last year, one of the outliers. Your historical performance had your recurring revenues growing faster than your recurring expenditures. It's actually, I've been doing this for 20 years. It's the first time I'd ever seen that. But your income tax base has changed, and so your mix has changed. Go to the next slide and talk a little bit about that. So you get most of your revenue from the earned income tax. If I were doing this in a lot of other communities, there'd be another slice on here that would be almost as big, if not bigger. It would be your real estate tax. You do get real estate tax revenues, but they're actually the third or fourth largest revenues that you have from a tax perspective. Your local services tax, which is a tax on jobs, it's a head tax, and your transfer tax, which is a tax on moving of property, generate almost as much as your real estate tax, even after the real estate tax increase you did last year. But what you effectively did is, if I had done this chart, this is your general fund revenue budget for 26, I believe. If I had done this 2 years early, you would see this bigger slice would be even larger, because you were getting an even larger share of your earned income tax from your total revenues from your earned income tax. What you have effectively done over the last few years is, as this one dropped, this one grew to keep the pie whole, and this one is not worth as much as that one in the long term. You can go to the next slide. So $1 of real estate tax today is worth the same as $1 of earned income tax today. Not surprisingly, it's worth $1. But over a period of time, they are not worth the same. Earned income tax generally grows. Here it has grown very rapidly. Coming out of COVID, 7, 8, 9% a year. Now, more recently, that has come down to 5, 4, 3% a year. But the earned income tax, again, if we all walk away and never come back, people in Euclid will generally make more money over time. And without touching the tax rate, those revenues will grow. Not true for the real estate tax. The real estate tax only grows when there's something called reassessment. Bobby knows very, very well from his county days. Unless the assessed value, not the market value, unless the assessed value of property changes, you get the same dollar because the property is assumed to be worth the same thing year after year after year after year after year. So the only time your real estate tax revenues grow is, one, someone comes into town and builds something brand new. And that does happen here, although you're trying to protect open space, so you don't want a ton of that. Or they do a reassessment, and even then you're required to reduce your rate to keep it even. So this dollar I know will grow, and I'm assuming in my baseline that it grows by 3.5% a year, and this dollar I assume will not. So what the 2026 budget did, quite understandably, because you have, by the way, you only have really 2 levers you can use in Pennsylvania. You can't do a sales tax, you can't do those sorts of things, is you traded the one that grows for the one that doesn't. This is how important, your single most important revenue section is your earned income tax. This is a little, like a Technicolor wig out here. But here's the general concept. This is the growth rate of your earned income tax. This is whether you have a deficit or not. you start with a small surplus, $246,000. If I assume that your revenues grow by 5% a year, this is actually pretty close to what it was from 2020 to 2023 or 2024, you're balanced. We can all leave and never come back, right? You have a balanced budget. If I assume it does better than that, you actually continue to generate surpluses. But if it still grows, just not as fast, if it grows by 4% or 3.5% or 2.5%, it doesn't actually grow fast enough to keep up with your expenses, so you end up in a deficit. Let's talk about what you spend your money on. Mostly your people, and you should. That's what local government is. You don't build aircraft carriers here. You're police, you're the people in this building, you're public works, you're in the people business, right? And you spend most of your money on cash compensation for employees, fringe benefits, that's pensions and health insurance, and then some other stuff. And yes, you pay for a trash contract, and that's very meaningful too. But this is, I could wipe the name of the community off of here and the slices, and it would look almost exactly the same in most Pennsylvania municipalities. Your cash compensation growth, to the point you just made, over the last 5 years has only grown by 1.8% total. Now, it doesn't mean the police officers, they may be growing faster, but the total cash compensation, well, why would that be? You haven't frozen wages. Attrition, turnover, and vacancies. Someone leaves, their replacement doesn't walk in immediately the moment after they leave, they don't walk in with the same salary, and so you get some natural savings there. The fringe benefits, on the other hand, have grown at a faster rate, 5.7%. Health insurance, 6%. That's not too bad. Pension contributions, particularly to the police plan, I promise we didn't coordinate this, but they've grown faster. So what we assume on our baseline is we assume 3.5% growth in cash compensation year, which may be too high. Why? Because we assume you're going to give people annual increases, and we don't account for the fact that Joe's going to leave and you're going to hire Joanne instead, but it's going to take 3 months. We just assumed Joe's here forever. Health insurance growth is by 6%. And this in our model, by the way, these are the types of variables we can change. So we could go in and say, well, what if earned income tax grows by 5 instead of 4 or 3? What if the salary is increased by 2 instead of 3? What if the head count is smaller? What if health insurance is cheaper? And as you play with those variables, you can see how it rolls through and impacts your overall financial performance. All to get at the very end of this, which is to say, how much money do I have to spend on capital stuff? Remember, that's where we're going to land. Now, your pension contribution to the police plan, if you want to go to the next page, is exactly the one thing I wanted to highlight on the expenditure side. This is your contribution to the police plan. As Ashley explained, it's your MMO, your minimum municipal obligation. And the obligation isn't just a cool word, it's actually a legal obligation, and you could get in trouble for not doing it. This is one of the key differences that we're going to talk about as you think about, you asked a really good question, why wouldn't we go faster? I'm going to give you one reason why you should think about it, which I actually like the where you're headed, but still, I'll still give you a different way to think about it. So over from 2014 to 2020, the CAGR, compound annual growth rate, for your contribution for your police pay was basically flat. It's 0.6, but you can see, you can just look at the numbers and say that doesn't move very much. In the last 6 years, it's grown by 11.6% a year. You can see that growth rate. We have built into our model, not coincidentally, an $130,000 increase in your contribution for next year. So if you're sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, how are we going to pay for that? Good, but also we've already included it in our projection. What we have not included, though, is the future changes in the assumptions. Well, what if I lower the interest earnings assumption? What if I assume people live longer? What if I assume people have a higher salary? What if people actually have a higher salary than we do? We have not factored any of that in. Why? Because we actually worked with Ashley 8 months ago to ask her what we should do. But also because of that, because we're trying to give you a baseline to say, okay, if nothing changes, how should we think about this, right? So from your pension contribution perspective, one thing I want to highlight that I think is important is the valuation that you just presented is the amount that the township should contribute effective January 1st, 2025. You didn't make that deadline. We're sitting here in February of 2026. You will start to make it in January of 2027. So you will already be 2 years behind. Now, if the market does awesome, that may not matter. But if it does less awesome, that may matter. Here's the way to think about all of this and how I would tie this in. Think about your pension contribution as another form of investment, because it is. if we all walk out of here and we just pretend none of this happens and we ignore all the stuff that Bobby and Ashley have talked about, it won't actually change what happens. You'll still have to contribute more to the police pension plan because the O in MMO is obligation. It means legal obligation. So the pension plan has to be funded, and you have to think about the types of changes you can make. But here's the other side. It's not the only thing you want to do. Because I could touch a fire truck, and I could drive on a road, and I could walk on a park, and I could stand in a building, but I could do none of that in a police pension plan. And your residents will want to see what they're getting for your money. So they're both investments. They're both worth making, but you'll have to balance them with each other. So what does this mean for capital planning? Remember, that's where I was going to start. So your general fund, if you do nothing, again, does not spin off a lot of money to pay for roads and to pay for bridges and to pay for parks. And maybe that's a no-duh moment. Over the last 5 years, your budget, what you budgeted, what you would assume the general fund would do to pay for capital was nothing. And you actually did better than that. So nothing, and you contributed $125,000. That's $125,000 that went from your general fund into the capital fund. And then still in the heart of COVID, zero, and you actually moved over 800, then zero, and you moved over $1.3 million, then zero and $1.8 million. And then as luck was have it, the first year that you assumed that you would move something over, I'm not actually sure if you did, because your earned income tax revenues dropped. So maybe you're better off assuming you'd never make a contribution. I don't think that's the takeaway. The takeaway here is two things. One, your 2026 budget has nothing going from the general fund to the capital fund. You will probably do better than that. How do I know that? Because that's what history tells me. But it won't happen by accident. Because the first thing that will happen is your police pension contribution will go up, and that will take you the wrong direction. You can still manage against that and get a better result, but it's not likely to spin off these levels again. So if we're thinking about how do I pay for playground equipment or changes to the stormwater funds, we're going to have to find and work for the money. Where would it come from? I'm so glad you asked. Two different ways to fund capital plans, right? The first is cash. When you get money from your taxes and you move it over to your capital fund, that's just cash. When you get a grant, that's just cash. When the state sends you your liquid fuels money and use it to pave a road, that's just cash. The other way to do it is through issuing debt. There's a lot of value to doing it with cash. Obviously, it has no interest costs. It preserves flexibility, so you don't have to worry about, if I do that thing today, does that going to mean I'm less able to do something else tomorrow? And it's really good to pay for smaller things. So you have things in your capital budget that are pieces of equipment that are worth $15,000, $20,000. Those things you'd really rather pay with cash. You don't want to be borrowing, extreme example, but you don't want to borrow 10 years to pay for a stapler, right? Obviously, a stapler is not a piece of capital equipment, but you get the idea. That said, debt is not really a four-letter word. I know it is, but not really in that sense. It's okay to have debt, right? And it's okay to borrow money to do big things. Most places do. In fact, there's a quasi-philosophical argument that you should borrow money to build really big things. If you are building a new building that the next 3 generations of people are going to use for the next, 30, 40 years, the people who live here and pay taxes today should probably not pay for all of it. It should probably be paid for over some period of time. So this is where your capital money has come from over the last 4 years. Here's your story of your capital budget, a very high level. Coming out of COVID, you're making very sizable contributions. Your revenues in the general fund, largely because of the earned income tax, are much higher than you need to pay for your operations. So wisely, you're taking a chunk of that money every year, not increasing your operating budget up to spend up to what you're collecting. You're saying we're setting that aside to pay for future capital stuff. But coming out of COVID, not actually doing very much capital stuff, $43,000 a year, $41,000 a year. So I put money aside, I don't use it, and I build up this fund balance, this reserve, to $2 million and into $3.8 million. And into 2024 and 2025, you do the right thing, which is you spend it. The goal is not, let's see how high I can push this number. It's to actually use it. So you start to use it on things, and I'll show you what those are in a moment. But the money that you bring in, both from the general fund, and there's some money from some other sources we'll talk about in a second, is less than you're spending. So you start to spend that balance down. So it goes from 2 to 4 to 2.8 to 1.8. This is your 2026 budget. On its face, you're going to spend $3.1 million. That's the amount of projects you have. And it's not all going to come from reserves. You have some state and federal grants. The open space earned income tax spins off money that you can use for certain types of projects. So it's not like you're just going on a spending spree and not doing anything on the revenue side. But if you do what's actually in the capital budget, you will spend more than you bring in. And you'll be pretty close at the end of this year to not having anything in the account, which is okay. This is not your general fund account. You're not trying to keep this. There's a certain amount of reserves you should keep in your operating fund. This is not an operating fund. This is your capital fund. This is where you set money aside and then you use it as you need it. But once you get to the end of this year, if you actually do the things you have planned, you will have used up most of that money. You do have other funds. Oh, but first let's talk about how you spend the money. This is where you spend it. What do we spend it on? Stuff, for starters, right? Capital is stuff, it's buildings, it's roads, it's hardware, it's vehicles. So it's largely structures, general construction equipment. There is some engineering or planning services in here, but it's largely stuff. It's the inverse of the operating budget, which what do you spend that on? People, right? There's other than outside people, there's no salary expenses in here or health insurance or pensions. Okay, but where do we spend it? Parks, largely for your earned income tax, is a big spot. Roads and highways, I think you have a grant in there that funds a lot of that work. Stormwater, we'll come back to that one in a second. Right now, you don't have a stormwater fee. When you turn on your water at home, the water revenues, the fee associated with that utility pays for the expenses associated with that utility. The people who use it, the pipes, all of that sort of stuff. When you flush the toilet, it's the same way. The wastewater utility revenue pays for the stuff that is associated with managing the wastewater. When it rains and the water runs down the road and carries a bunch of stuff you don't want in your drinking water into the drinking water system, right now you pay for that to your general fund. You don't have a separate fee, what would be a stormwater fee to pay for that. Something you could think about, but right now the stormwater revenues come out of the same source as everything else. So you do have a couple other funds. We talked about the capital fund. We talked about the general fund. There are a handful of others that can put their little shoulders to the till, at least in a small way. Open space actually generates a very nice amount of money. You just can only spend it on certain things. You can't spend open space EIT to buy a fire truck or to build a building, right? That's obviously not open space, but the amount of money that you have from the open space fund is a nice amount. Why? Because it's the earned income tax again, and it's growing it the same way. The fire tax does not contribute anything to capital this year, but your revenues should naturally be a little higher than your expenses, and you could eventually set aside some money and maybe take care of some equipment for the fire marshal that way. State liquid fuels, this is the funding source that goes the other way. As people drive more Teslas or electrical vehicles, people drive less. The amount of revenue that the state collects from this tax goes down, and the amount that you receive every year goes down. So this one's kind of on a downward-facing slope. This one's on a very positive upward-facing slope. And this is the real estate tax, so it's just a flat line on it. But these things do each contribute something that can go through towards something on the capital fund side. You also have a bond fund the last time you issued debt, which was, I don't even know when that was, 24? Okay. That has about $1 million in it, and that could be used for a wide range of projects. You could think of that as kind of an extension of the capital fund. All right, so what does all this mean? This has been a long presentation. Like 4 or 5 key takeaways, and then what we're working on now. 1, the general fund, if you do nothing else, has a deficit next year, and it's all hurtful. No, it's because of your police pension plan, right? So it's something you have to think about, and you have to think about pension is an investment, because it is. If you put money into it now, and it grows now, you have a higher likelihood of having to put less in later. It's not money lost. If you don't put the money in now, it's the exact inverse of that. But again, you can't stand inside a police pension plan, right? What your residents expect you to spend money on will probably be a mix of the two things. So that's the general fund story. You have money in these other funds, the bond fund, the capital fund, but not surprisingly, it doesn't last forever, right? And if you do the projects at the pace you're projecting this year, you get through this year, you might even have enough cash to do the smaller things next year, 2027, but eventually you are not only not able to do a big thing, but you're also not able to do the little things that would be ideally funded through cash, okay? A stormwater fee would help. That's a much longer conversation. I'm just telling you from a financial perspective, a full stormwater fee would help. So let's go to the last slide. Okay, so where we are now is we're back in our model. So thankfully, we won't have to make too many changes because of that. Although, if you make an assumption, if you change the assumptions in the police plan, as you should, then we would go into our model and say, okay, let's assume they're spending a little more on their police plan in these out years, and it changes the picture in that way, right? So what we have is this year, you're using $4.5 billion. The proceeds, just adding up all these things, is 2.9. The gap to funding, I think that's just drawing down fund balance. What we're trying to do here is say, okay, if you do nothing, there's obviously not enough revenue. Duh. If you know, I've said that 5 different ways already. So the question is, one, are there things on the uses side, that's up here, okay, where you could say, well, let's stretch it out, let's move it around. This thing here, I believe, is largely the building project. So that's why it's all the way out here, right? Or what could we do more on this side? Are there more grants we could get? Open space, that's kind of limited. Would you have, I know it says sewer fund, but would you ever consider a stormwater fee that would go through a utility fund that would help carry the load? Our goal now is to say, okay, what do you really want to do for your capital projects? What are your options for funding it? And how does it tie into the overall financial picture? Again, recognizing that you are, at the same time, you're not just a police department, you're not just a police pension plan, you're not just this building, you're all of those things together. So how do we think about them all together?
Thank you. Any board comments, questions, thoughts?
A lot of thoughts, a lot of questions. They're all swarming in
Some
my
time
head
to
right now,
digest.
but yeah, it's a lot to digest. I mean, what I just took away is that we need to do something.
Sure.
But you reiterated
Yeah.
that a lot.
Yeah.
It's to think about it. One, yeah, there's a lot to digest there. You've got the right people to help you, to lead you through doing that. It's to think about it. So the next plan, the next step in your journey here is not to figure out how to build the thing that's 5 years out. It's to do the police pension plan assumptions and to look at those and go, okay, the next, whatever it is, give her a few days to file the paperwork, whatever it is. 35 days, we need to figure out which of these assumptions is a reasonable thing to do. And while we have to make a decision for 2025, we may also want to say in the next round, we're going to try and do X, right? We're going to try and do a 0.5 percentage point or whatever that is, right? And then you layer that into the model. And then you come back and say, okay, this is how our earned income taxes are. Are they growing better than we thought they were? Are our cash compensation levels growing lower, better than we thought they would? Has the baseline changed? And then from there, you can say, okay, I'm looking at the list of capital projects. I really know, or I know that I really need to do this one, and that one. Maybe that one can slide. Now I think about how to fund it. But you can take it, you can both take a step back and think about the overall picture and take it one step at a time. And you'll probably end up in the right place.
Well, we've definitely talked about the stormwater fee before, Bobby, you were here. We were already talking about it. It's been going about 3 or 4 years. So it's something I think we need to look closely at now. I think that's something we're thinking of regardless. But yeah,
So
I-
but that wouldn't address the potential deficit in the pension plan, right? Because that's kind of more an immediate
Correct.
issue.
That would help you with the capital.
Capital long term,
Yeah.
right?
Take the
But,
stormwater portion of that pie that's leaning on the capital fund, and it would take that.
right. So we're really is 2 issues here, right?
Right.
It's the MMO, the mandatory issue that we have to meet, which is the pension fund. And then what are we going to do with longer term projects, which may be addressed by the stormwater fee? Okay.
And the only point I would make on that though is with the stormwater fee, I'm not saying that we have to, but we have the opportunity, much the way the utility fee for sewer shares the cost of some operating expenses, administration, things like that. We have the ability, as we look at a stormwater fee, of shifting some of those general fund operating expenses to be supported by the stormwater fee in addition to the capital projects. at the end of the day, like fundamentally, when you look at it, it's, are we, is the stormwater fee a little bit higher, or is real estate tax going up, or are we looking to see that the EIT has a little bit of a greater growth? Somewhere all of that is coming, and much the way the real estate tax, as Gordon said, like $1 today in real estate tax is worth $1 in 2030 of real estate tax. The utility fees are much the same in that, if the rate is $1 today and it stays $1 till 2030, it's still worth $1. We don't have that planned growth in fees like that.
It's not gonna be decided today, but I wish it were.
Yeah.
Nobody leaves until it's figured out.
And I appreciate Ashley coming to talk about the pension plan, and Gordon coming to talk about kind of the baseline that was put together on the long range study. And no one had, at least from the staff side, no one had an expectation that we'd walk out of here with answers or anything else. But it's I think what we're doing the important part of starting the conversations, and looking at it in this more strategic, long range view, as opposed to year after year after year of what's coming at us. One of the things that we've talked with Gordon about is now looking at our EIT and looking at things like where else are we vulnerable? How are we vulnerable to other municipalities then coming in and enacting an EIT, and what are we losing there? And what realistically should we, like, what's a little bit more of a confident number to plug into that model for that EIT growth? So we're looking at those things, and just figuring out how to make the models stronger to help guide our decision making.
Yeah, and I'll double down on that and say how much I appreciate these presentations. It's not always the most digestible information, especially in a public meeting. I know we don't have anyone here today, but certainly hope that the public goes back and watches these videos and understands that the budget starts way, way before the discussions in November and December. I know over the last handful of years, we have really put a priority on capital planning and our long-term financial health, and it's brought up some of these difficult conversations and decisions that have to be made. But ultimately, I think that it's really putting the township in a position to be more successful long-term and more intentional about the projects and the equipment and the facilities that we have to maintain. So I want to thank the staff for investing their time and putting all this together for us. And certainly it's only February, so we'll be having budget conversations all year long. Anything else for at the moment?
Yeah.
Do we have a copy of the presentation?
We do.
Okay.
Oh, good.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much, both of you, for most of what you presented. All right, with that, we will move on to number 3 on our business agenda, which is the business meeting agenda review for Monday.
It's a fun agenda. Other than the usual reports, we'll open the meeting with the ceremonial swearing in of our new police chief, Chief Jim Fisher, who's with us today. He was officially sworn in on Tuesday, but we'll have Judge Simmons here to do the ceremonial swearing in and recognize him and welcome him to the community. We may have a recognition of. Okay. So at some point here in the near future, maybe on Monday, we're going to recognize Officer Navarra. She was awarded a an award from the Crime Victim Center for being a victim advocate and all of the work that she does in supporting victims of crime. So we'll be very excited to do that either in February or later on. We'll have a couple of appointments one to the Planning Commission and one to the Historical Commission. We hired a new part-time billing clerk, so we'll officially make that announcement. And then consideration of an ordinance for the Volunteer Emergency Services Tax Rebate Program. We'll look for permission to advertise for changes to Chapter 99, which is our brush, grass, weeds, and trees ordinance, and permission to advertise a Verizon cable franchise agreement authorization. We may need to finalize something, but we may have authorization to purchase night vision goggles for the Westchester Regional Emergency Response Team, and then an extension request Rockwell provided, I think, till June 11th to hold the first hearing. Should be quick.
Just one question regarding our fiscal sponsorship or oversight of the Westchester ERT. Will we have regular expenditures coming across the board for approval at meetings, or how is that generally going to be handled?
No, so it's only going to be when it exceeds the bid threshold, which is this year set to $24,500. So essentially, they're going to follow our procurement policy, and only contracts in excess of the 24.5 will come before the board.
All right.
Great.
Any questions or comments on the agenda? No. Anything else?
And I'll just note, after the meeting, we'll have the continuation of the Suburban Studios hotel license hearing. Decision there.
All right. Anything else from the board?
No.
Anything from the public? All right, not seeing any. I will go ahead and ask for a motion